Welcome to episode 86 of Rubbish Talk with me, Alasdair.
And me, Samantha Riggs.
Not Jane Bond this week. So Jane Bond is busy again. So we have Samantha Riggs from 25 Bedford Row. And do you want to do a quick introduction of yourself, who you are, Samantha, and what you do?
Yes, thank you. I'm Samantha Riggs, criminal barrister from 25 Bedford Row. I have a very unusual practice for a criminal practitioner because my specialisation is environmental and more specifically waste management. And I have been specialising in waste management for over a decade now. Prior to that, I was in my youth a fraudster. I did a lot of fraud work.
Not physically doing the fraud.
Not physically doing the fraud.
Defending her.
Yeah, I've done some really interesting work from like a hallmarking. Probably my most favourite case was a hallmarking fraud, which was based around the Jewellery quarter in Birmingham. And it was all, the allegation was that hallmarks had been cast into jewellery rather than sent off to be stamped by the SI office. So that was a really interesting case, one of my personal favourites. Although the most notorious fraud case I was involved with was a man who posed as an MI5 spy. And that's got 9 months of my life at Blackfriars Crown Court whilst he was charged with kidnapping by fraud. And if you ever get bored, then go onto Netflix and look up Rogue Agent and you'll find a programme all about that case. So completely different world, the one I'm operating in now.
How did you transition into waste? What was the...
I'd always done a little bit of regulatory work. So a bit of health and safety, a bit of trading standards, because that was obviously the jewellery case was trading standards. So a bit of trading standards, a bit of health and safety, a bit of environmental. And the fraud cases they were long, involved. Say the longest case I did was 9 months. And it's obviously not 9 months of just being in court every day doing that case. It's the lead up to it. It can take a couple of years preparing those kind of cases. And I just thought, I'm not enjoying this as much as I used to. And what do I really enjoy? I really enjoy the environmental regulation. And so I'm going to focus on that. So I basically took a step back from my practice and said, I'm going to just start reading up and looking more at this legislation. And that was 12 years ago. And the rest, as they say, is history. I've never gone back.
There we go. I think first things first, welcome. I think you're the first barrister onto Rubbish Talk.
Oh,
so
how exciting.
Unless somebody's been in disguise when they've come on previously, I think you're definitely the first. And you are an avid listener as well to Rubbish Talk.
I am. I've listened to you from the beginning. So
yeah, there you go. You're one of first.
Yep, one of your first. And one of the things that's really important actually in my job is to stay up to date with what's going on. And I find it just really a great way of keeping on top of things, listening to you or checking out the newsletter from CIWM, for example. You just need to stay ahead of the curve. And so there's a lot of homework that goes into doing that.
Yeah, no, brilliant. And congratulations on your fellow to CRWM, because that's actually how I met you recently, wasn't it?
Yes.
I was in the panel, so there you go.
Yes.
So it's a small world. So what I think we're going to try and chat about is you're obviously all involved in the environmental legislation side. There's obviously a lot of topical cases coming up in terms of fly tipping, litter and so on, and maybe share some views in terms of what's going on. Probably the big fly tipping incidents seem to be happening in the south at the moment.
Yes.
I'm not saying they're only happening in the south. I'm sure there's some in Scotland at the moment, but the ones that have caught the attention, and in fact I noticed Keir Starmer replied to a question or something in Parliament or something about one of them, or made some mention of it recently. So they're certainly grabbing the attention at the moment.
Well, no, absolutely. There's a number of different sites. I mean, as you're aware, back in September, there was the House of Lords Committee inquiry on waste crime, where Dr. Anna Willits was giving evidence to the committee, and I went along to carry her bags for her and listen to what was being said. It was absolutely fascinating, actually. And I've listened to all of the evidence that was given. And I think there was a lot of frustration being expressed during that inquiry about the way that there's a targeting of regulated industry, which is predominantly who I'm
Yep.
looking
Yep.
for, is regulated industry, and compliance issues. It's not necessarily, I'm a criminal practitioner, but I deal with non-criminal matters. So it might just be general compliance or status of material. Is it waste? Is it not waste? Those kind of compliance issues. And so that's where my practice is focused around. And I sense from regulated industry the frustration about these illegal waste sites that are springing up around the country that don't seem to come under the spotlight anywhere near any non-compliance at a regulated site. And so there's a real frustration around that. And I understand why, because, I might be at court and see 5 Environment Agency officers turn up and sit in the public gallery. Now, the agency might say, well, they're there for training purposes or whatever reason it may be. But when you talk about underfunding and you see people just sitting around court and nothing happening, and then at the same time you see waste sites springing up where there's a massive deposit of waste, you think something is going wrong in the system. And I think that's what was coming out loud and clear from the inquiry, that there's a lot of issues going on with the illegal deposit of waste. And how can this be happening? The Environment Agency is one of the few regulators, other than the police, that have access to the number plate recognition system. So they're able to look at registration numbers and check the system to see who they belong to. And they have the powers to stop waste going onto a site. That's one of the issues with Hodes Wood, is why did it take so long to go to court and get a restriction order to stop the waste being deposited there?
And the recent one I've seen, that one is at Kidlington in Oxford.
Yeah, Kidlington.
That's right beside a main road. It's been thousands of tons have gone in there. It's not just been dumped. It's been it's been dumped and then placed. The size of that pile.
Yeah, it's been that's a planned organisation, that's done that. I've, from what I've read about it in the news, they're saying that the material is processed, so it's come from a facility that's processing it, wherever that facility may be, and they're able to trace some of the waste back. But the Environment Agency, according to the press, knew about it in July. And there was a lady on Radio 5 yesterday who was horrified that her children had been swimming in the river over the summer months when all this was taking place.
Downstream of it.
Yeah, yeah. And so, you can understand the public have genuine concerns about this, and they scratch their head and say, well, if the agency knew about it in July, why did it take until October to go and get a restriction order? So since the restriction order has been in place, it said that no further waste has gone in there. But why has there been a delay between July to October to go to court and get that order? Because once a notice is issued, the court must hear it within 72 hours.
So in terms of the process, say, just for my knowledge and listeners' knowledge, so say there is a illegal activity like that, so waste has been dumped. What powers have the Environment Agency got? How do they get that enforcement order, and how quickly can that be done? So
a restriction notice needs to be issued, and it has to be issued to the owner or occupier of the land.
Yeah, so there might, in cases, be some difficulty finding that.
There might be, but the legislation envisages that, because obviously, this is meant to be a draconian power.
Mm-hmm.
It's meant to be stopping waste mountains. And it actually came about as a result of, I don't know if you recall, probably back in 2013, 14, something like that, there was the waste for fuel site in Orpington, and there was a massive waste mountain next to a house. And everyone was going, this is outrageous. How did that mountain grow so high? Why didn't the agency do anything about it? And at the time, the agency said, well, we can't, because we can't actually stop the waste going on site, because if we stop people going onto their own land, we could get taken to the High Court, and we don't have the powers. And so as a result of that, there was a change in the law, and Section 109A of the Environment Act 1995 was introduced. That was introduced in April 2018. And that gave the Environment Agency specific powers to stop people entering land with waste, to prevent a repeat of the waste for fuel site. Now, recognising you might not be able to find the owner or the occupier, it's built into the system that once you issue the notice having made reasonable efforts. And if you can't identify them, you can still go to court and obtain an order. And there's provision within the regulatory framework that if the owner or occupier then becomes aware of it and they want to object to the order, they can go back before the court and say this shouldn't have been issued. And so there's a sort of
a self-appeal process.
Yes, exactly. Because it may be not possible to, identify the owner or the occupier. So,
and then I presume once that's in place, then that, by the sound of it, that stopped the activity now. Well, it looks like the place is full now, so there's no room to tip any more waste in.
That's true. But in both Hoadswood and in Kidlington, the agency have said since the restriction order, there's been no further waste tipped. So that's been a solution to further tipping. So the question is, why wasn't that done sooner? And it's actually it was a question that Mary Craig asked by the inquiry. She said that there was confusion about who was responsible for the land. Now, I appreciate, as I say, it can be difficult to maybe identify the owner or the occupier, and you've got to make reasonable efforts to do that. But in terms of who's responsible, it's very clear who's responsible. So if you've got litter, which is, there's no definition of litter in law. It's not like litter is defined as waste is the general definition, but litter is considered to be less than a black bin bag.
Yep. Fly
tipping is effectively a black bin bag up to a tipper load, and anything over 20 tons thereabouts is considered to be a legal deposit of waste. So that's how it's broken down. And there's a memorandum of understanding between local authorities and the Environment Agency setting this out. And that's now transposed onto gov.uk, where there's the guidelines about who's responsible for what. So if it's litter or fly tipping, it's the local authority. Anything over that falls into the remit of the Environment Agency. So basically, a black bin bag, more than a black bin bag, is the Environment Agency. Well, where you've got 30,000 tonnes going into Hoadswood, although I'm told it's actually probably more likely to be nearer 50,000 tonnes, that's clearly more than a tipper load. It falls under the jurisdiction of the Environment Agency. You're talking about in excess of probably 1,000 wagons going in there to deposit that amount of material.
It's madness, because, at that tonnage, that's clean-up cost of that will be £10 million at least. Now, if you take landfill tax and landfill fee or a waste energy fee or whatever, and then costs for moving it around, you easily go into the £10-15 million region.
There was an order issued that the Environment Agency have to clear it up. And so the Environment Agency at the moment are organising the clear up of that site. So,
but they'll not have the budget for that, will they?
Well, they won't, and ultimately they'll be dependent upon trying to recover those costs through the court process because arrests have been made, and they'll be trying to recover them. But there are limits on what you can recover, which we can talk about in a minute if you like. But there's limits on what you can recover. So yes, there is going to be a black hole, which makes it all the more important
that you stop it
early. Yeah, exactly.
And what's the risk with stopping it early? Why do you think there's a reluctance to stop it earlier, or is it just lack of knowledge of what's going on?
There's not lack of. I mean, in relation to Hoadswood, it was known very early on what there was material going in there. You can understand from an operational perspective that you might want to carry out surveillance for a short period of time so that you can effectively see who it is going in there, establish patterns and stuff. So there may be a degree of the lapse of time because for operational reasons, as I say, you might want to, capture the number plates of the vehicles going in there. But there comes a time where you have to say enough is enough because our overriding duty is protection of the environment. And so let's stop this before it gets out of hand. But I mean, I don't know. And it was questions that were being raised during the inquiry, and answers were unable to be given. And that's why Baroness Sheehan has recommended that there be an inquiry into what exactly happened there, and what went wrong.
And what about other powers the Environment Agency's got in terms of, can they seize vehicles or anything, or can do any of that type of stuff? Or
the powers in January this year, the chief regulator of the agency said the agency need more teeth. My personal opinion is that they don't need more teeth. They need to be effective with the teeth that they've already got.
Yeah.
Because they have a lot of powers. They can seize vehicles, and they can issue restriction notices. They can do compulsory questioning. They have the power to go in and inspect. They have the power to go and take samples. They don't need permission to do these things. They just have the power to be able to go and do them. They can take samples. If we're talking about a permitted site, then they can issue enforcement notices, suspension notices, revocation notices. So there's all sorts of powers that they've got. From my perspective, they don't need more powers. They just need to use effectively the powers they've got.
Do you think, taking it a bit wider, do you think there's enough done? If you look at it from a UK point of view, so the HMRC get the landfill tax, and that, that's been increasing to, what is it, £126 a tonne, I think it is, some 126 something. So that's obviously driving this, that increase is driving, is driving waste to waste energy and away from landfill, but it's also driving this waste crime. Is there enough been done between all the government agencies, like HMRC, like the Serious Crime Team, or whatever they're called, to support the Environment Agency in this? Because, I think historically, looking at Environment Agency and SEPA, they were very much come on to regulated sites and regulate these sites and make sure they're complying with their permit and the environmental legislation. Dealing with organised serious crime that's tipping £10 million worth of waste into field is probably a totally different ballgame.
Yeah, I agree. And actually, that's again something that was coming out of the House of Lords inquiry, is the lack of coordination between the various different agencies and sort of communication. The Joint Unit of Waste Crime was set up for that reason, to have the collaborative approach. But the landfill tax is an issue, and there was a recent consultation where they're talking about removing the lower rate of landfill tax, and that was again an issue that came up during the inquiry, to say, is that a wise move? What's the impact that's going to have? Is that going to have the desired effect, or is it going to run the risk of driving, creating more crime, because that waste's got to go somewhere? And it was something that the House of Lords inquiry was saying you should rethink. That needs to be looked at again. Although in theory there should be more connectivity between the agencies, the different agencies, in practice, the question whether or not that's working.
I always remember, this is one of the ones I always hark back to. So I ran a landfill site in 1996 when the landfill tax came in. And I think it was, I always forget this, and I always have to read up, it's either £5 or £7 a tonne that came in it, and the low rate was, I think, £2 a tonne. The inert waste we got into that landfill site from the 1st of April that year just vanished. It just disappeared. We had nothing. So for years and years and years, we ran the landfill sites that everything was high rate landfill tax. And then you look at the figures recently, and something like 25 or 30% is allegedly this low rate tax. And we've got all this loss of ignition that we've got to work out and calculate and so on. But, there's so much stuff going into these sites at low rate that's not, not genuinely low rate tax.
No, I mean, that's, that's again part of the issue that was being picked up about landfill tax fraud, and the fact that there hasn't been, again, it was something that came up during the House of Lords inquiry, that there hadn't been any prosecutions for landfill tax fraud, even though it's known to be operating in the industry and undercutting legitimate operators. Yeah. So a cause of concern. But then again, I also see cases
where it's the other way, where the operators are getting a hard time about it as well.
Yeah, I'm about to say that there's the EFRA committee a few years ago were were looking at soil health and talking about soils and why were there so many resources going to landfill that could be in the circular economy. I see a number of different cases where operators are being told that has to go to landfill by the regulator, and they're like, why does it have to go to landfill? Why can't it be reused? And so I think that it's a combination of factors as to why there's so much going in at lower rate tax, not just the landfill tax fraud issue.
I think one of the things that was interesting with that recent case was this maybe a little bit of a recognition now that it's not the waste sector that's fault. The waste sector's a victim of all the waste crime as much as anybody else, but 9 times out of 10 they're competing with that criminal element. And I think up till now that's maybe not been acknowledged.
No, I mean, I agree with that. And I remember for a long time I've been banging the drum saying, when you talk about waste crime, can we be clear about what we're talking about? Because you're like lumping everyone in together and saying waste crime. But, there's legitimate operators out there who are doing a very good job in very difficult circumstances. You've got the guys on the bin rounds, go and do a bin round, you know what hard work is all about. They're doing great jobs in very difficult circumstances, and that needs to be obviously recognised. And I think it was unfortunate the circumstances that it came about, because Mary Cray said to government earlier this week about they'd inherited a whole system, basically a failing system from end to end at all levels, something like that she said about the waste industry. The waste industry is a whole wholesome failure, which of course upset, you could understand,
most of the waste world.
Those are actually trying to do a good job for the country, and you can see what happens when they, when they're not doing it. Look at Birmingham with all, with what was happening in Birmingham and how important they are to the country in terms of managing waste. DEFRA came out clarifying that statement yesterday or the day before, and said something like, well, no, that they recognise, I've got it written down here, that the government values the work of the waste management industry in supporting its shared ambitions that transition to the circular economy. Their impact is undermined by the activities of waste criminals who harm the environment, economy, and the economy. So I was pleased to hear that, because at last there's a distinction between the regulated sector who are trying to do the right thing and the waste criminals who say that are undermining it.
So going back to the House of Lords report, what's the next stage for that, or is it in it? So there was an inquiry, and then there was a fairly detailed letter, I think.
Yeah, so there was an inquiry, and there is a report which was sent under the cover of a letter, and the letter basically,
it was fairly harsh from what didn't it?
Yes.
The one I read, didn't it pull many punches?
No, the word incompetence did appear in black and white, but then I know that Mr. Duffy is hit back on that and said,
Mr. Duffy is
the CEO of the Environment Agency. So yeah, so he came back and has hit back and said he doesn't accept it. But I listened to the evidence, and listeners can read it for themselves and make up their minds. But basically Baroness Sheehan was saying she wants an inquiry into what's happening.
Because there's not just the two we've talked about. There's lots of similar cases that are maybe not quite as large in scale.
Well, I think there's talk of being at least six sites around the country. But I think, as I say, going back to Hodes Wood, the question has to be, the Environment Agency knew the waste was going in. For the amount of waste that's there, it's been going in over a protracted period of time. They're being told about it by local residents, and nothing happens until you've already got a mountain of a minimum of 30,000 tonnes. And so when you look at that particular example, you can understand the comments that are being made in the letter from Baroness Sheehan. And there does need to be some answers in relation to what happened and how it was managed. I mean, this is the reality.
For the listeners, we'll share the letter if you're interested. It's certainly worthy of a read, I would suggest. It It was a fairly good comprehensive letter.
Yes, it was. It was.
Yeah.
I mean, and during the course of the inquiry, I mean, I know from some of your previous episodes that the issue comes up about sentencing. And one of the things that was coming up during the inquiry was, are the sentences adequate enough for waste crime?
Mm-hmm.
And are the courts equipped for dealing with waste crime? And my answer to that, to both questions, are yes, the penalties are adequate enough. And yes, the courts are equipped to deal with waste crime. The
Mm-hmm.
issue is how the guidelines are applied. A court will only do what it's being, will only consider. So, for example, under the sentencing guidelines, step 1 of sentencing guidelines is you must consider compensation. Ordinary compensation might be if someone's been hit, then it might be compensation for injury. Or if someone has had something stolen, it might be compensation for what they've lost. But within the legislation, it specifically states that compensation in the case of environmental matters can relate to clear-up costs.
Yep.
And so there's an opportunity at step 1, before you've got into anything else, to request the clean-up cost of a case. And one of the cases that were discussed during the House of Lords inquiry was actually, ironically, an illegal deposit of waste that took place. There was an illegal deposit of waste on one of Veolia's landfills.
Right, okay.
But it was a closed landfill, so it wasn't operating. So Veolia had to incur the cost of taking that waste, removing it, and putting it somewhere where it could legitimately be deposited because it was a closed landfill. So they incurred cost, but there was no application made under step 1 of the sentencing guidelines to recover those costs. So you can't then complain, well, it's not, why didn't the defendant pay cleanup cost? Well, because the court were never asked to impose them.
So even if they were found guilty, then they had their penalty for being guilty, but they had no requirement to do the cleanup cost.
They pleaded guilty.
Yeah,
they actually pleaded guilty, admitted the offence, pleaded guilty, but the Environment Agency didn't apply under step 1 for recovery of the cleanup cost. Didn't apply for compensation for recovery of the cleanup cost. So the way that the sentencing guidelines are structured, you have a number of steps, and the court has to go through the steps. And so step 1 is compensation, which is where your cleanup costs fall into. Step 2 is confiscation, which is where your proceeds of crime fall into. And then your next series of steps is to work out culpability and harm. So you have to look at how serious was the harm. And you go from category 1 is the most serious, is major pollution. Then you have category 2 is significant pollution. And then you have category 3 is minor. And then category 4 is risk of pollution. So you look at, it's very formulaic. You look at what is the level of pollution, and then you look at the level of culpability. So you go from being deliberate to reckless to negligent to low culpability. Now, if you take a fly tipping, for example, or Hodeswood or something like that, it can only be described as deliberate. I mean, there can be no other way to describe it. And if you were taking a fly tipping, so if you were taking a fly tip, so it's a less than a tipper load, more than a black bag, it's difficult to see how you could make that come into significant harm, because it would be minor harm. But looking at deliberate and minor harm, you still have a good range of penalties that can come out of that. If it's more than like if you're looking at Hodeswood, then you're looking at significant, bordering into Hodeswood, it's got to be coming into major. So the starting point for deliberate major harm is 18 months custodial sentence. So that's your starting point, but then you have a range. So the range goes up to 5 years. It depends on the way it's charged. So there may be multiple offences. Those offences can run concurrently. So it's very structured, but it depends on how it's presented to the court in terms of what the court does with it. So the sentencing powers are there. It's how the case is presented depends on the outcome of it. Because also under the sentencing guidelines, step 5 allows you to remove economic benefit. So, for example, on a fly tipping, and I never understand why this doesn't happen, on a fly tipping, why don't you apply in step 5 of the sentencing guidelines? So you have a fine, and the fine is whatever the fine may be based upon your means. And then on top of that, you could ask for however much it's cost the council to remove the fly tip. So, and that doesn't ever happen. So when people say, well, the £400 fine is not enough, again, the way the fine is calculated, it depends on your income. And so again, it's formulaic at the back of the sentencing guidelines. It depends on how much your income is. But if you come to court with a fag packet and say on the back of the fag packet, I earn £100, why is that being accepted by the court? What should be happening is we want a financial reporting order. We want to know, how do you live? Where do you live? You're driving a car. How are you paying for your insurance? How do you, when you start asking those questions, then you see that the £100 in the back of the fag packet actually is not the true income. And because it's formulaic, if you put £100 in and then you calculate it up, you'll get a £400 fine. But if you find that the back of the fag packet is not reliable and you put £1,000 in as your income, then you get a £4,000 fine. So, it depends on what information's put in as to what you get out.
So why do you think that's not used at the moment? Just lack of knowledge, maybe?
Well, I think I did some work with CIWM actually, and Tina Benfield, who works with the fly tipping prevention group, and they've done a lot of work. CIWM's done a lot of hard work around fly tipping and trying to get appropriate sentences. And there's a document that we worked on, which was basically 10 steps to better sentencing, I think it's called, something like that. And so that was prepared for DEFRA, looking at fly tipping. And then I was asked to present this document to a group of local authority officers. And at the end of it, they were like, we've never had the sentencing guidelines explained to us like that before. We now know we need to be doing this, we need to be doing that, we need to be doing that. So in answer to your question, based upon that experience, I would say it's lack of understanding, lack of training as to how they can be used their maximum potential. I mean, they came out in 2014, I think it was. I mean, I've been working with them for over a decade.
We could share that one as well.
Yeah.
We could share that document as well.
Yeah, I think it's a useful document because it does take you through the steps and shows how you can get tougher sentences. But you see, one of the constraints the court has on them is that the law says that you can't impose a fine which is impossible to pay. So it always has to be based upon the defendant's means. And that's why sometimes you might see sentences and you think, well, that doesn't fit. But if there's been a proper investigation, and that's the problem, there's usually not a proper investigation into the finances. It's based upon what has been said. And that may lead to, let's say, sentences that were not actually reflective of the true situation. But assuming that there has been a proper investigation and you see that this individual can only afford X, you can't then impose a fine of Y because they won't be able to pay it. And the upshot of that is non-payment of fine, you go to prison. And so by default, you're giving them a prison sentence because they're never going to be able to pay it.
Yeah.
And that's not fair. That's not a fair way to manage things. And so there are constraints about ability to pay, and there's clear authority from the Court of Appeal about that.
So who would pay for that investigation? Would that be the council or would that be the court? For the financial investigation?
Well, the financial investigation, you basically apply for, when as part of the court case, you ask the court to order a financial investigation, and then the defendant has to, you ask a series of questions that you want answered, and then the defendant has to answer them. Because, your fly tipper comes along, and let's say they've said they've earned £100 a week. I'm just taking that as an easy figure. But then you say, well, where do you live? Who pays for your electricity? Who pays for your telephone? Who pays for your vehicle? How do you pay for your petrol? You start, do you own your own house? You start asking these questions and you build up a proper financial picture of the offender. Yeah. And then if they have the ability to pay, then you can, as say, there's ways of looking at, you can add the cleanup cost onto the sentence in addition to the fine. So the sentencing guidelines, in my opinion, are fit for purpose. It's how they're deployed that should be looked at.
Just thinking about these sentencing guideline, that CRWM document, is that, I take it that's England only, or is it a Scottish?
No, because I don't think that the sentencing guideline, it's the Sentencing Council of England and Wales. It doesn't apply in Scotland. I don't think you have the Sentencing Council in Scotland.
Yeah, I know. I've had that discussion with councils in Scotland where they have taken a fly tipper to court. They have won, but their clean-up costs were way in excess of what the fine was.
I guess you can look at it in terms of matters of principle and whether they can apply in Scotland by analogy, by way of principles.
Yeah.
As to how things are being dealt with in England and Wales.
Do you think enough's been, just on a wider point about the litter fly tipping? I always feel the litter and fly tipping doesn't it really get the respect it's due, and that's the precursor to the big waste crime we've been talking about. That's the start of it always.
Do you mean doesn't get the respect it deserves from the courts or from?
I think probably from the people that are meant to be regulating it, either the council or the Environment Agency.
I mean, I think of course, there's fixed penalty notices for fly tipping, and it used to be, it's gone up now, but the fixed penalty notice used to be I think it was £400, and now it's gone up. I think it might be 1,000. I haven't looked at it for a while, but I think
don't quote you in it.
Yeah, don't quote me on it. But it's something like that. And then I thought it's really interesting that the fixed penalty notice is like £400, and then a lot of the fines that were coming out of courts were about £400. So is the level of the fixed penalty notice kind of setting the level of how people view it in terms of severity, or is it just by absolute pure coincidence that a lot of the sentences seem to be around the 400 mark? And I do feel that there's having the fixed penalty notice. I understand why they do it, because it's an easy process to try and deal with a fly tip, and it has its place, but it does concern me that maybe it makes you think it's not that serious. And of course, the more fly tipping you get, the worse it becomes, because people then start using it as I think there was work done by Keep Britain Tidy that fly tipping attracts more fly tipping.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And when they did, I remember reading, and I thought that's fascinating. They did an experiment where they put down some artificial grass and made it look nice under this bin. And it actually stopped the fly tipping, because there'd been a lot of people putting fly tipping by putting, bags around the bin, and by putting down the artificial grass, it stopped people doing that, which I just thought was fascinating in terms of like the psyche of.
You maybe heard me talking. I did a little TikTok in the summer of the bins along Ayr Seafront on a busy weekend, and the bins weren't actually full. But some people had obviously put side waste beside the bin, so then everybody else put their waste beside the bin rather than actually putting it in the bin, because the bin was actually half empty. And it's like, and every bin had this wee pile of waste around it that the seagulls then destroy overnight and scatter it every place. But people's attitude to waste is very, very, very strange in terms of, they see a wee pile of waste, so they add to the pile for some reason.
Yeah, I agree, but I don't think I can't remember now where I was reading this, but I think councils aren't using the fixed penalty notices that much in terms of fly tipping.
I think my personal view is there should be a league table of every single council in the country about how many fixed penalties they've issued for littering and fly tipping.
Yeah.
And we should be able to go into this central site and have a look at it.
Well, accountability definitely as to what's happening, and I mean that goes back to the House of Lords inquiry again. One of the questions that I think it might have been Lord Duncan asked of the Joint Unit of Waste Crime: how many prosecutions have you successfully done since the creation of the Joint Unit of Waste Crime, which was I think in 2020. January 2020, I think it was established, and he didn't know.
Was it zero? Was that why he didn't know?
I think that was what I think that was the time when they said that's a woeful answer. So yes, there should be more transparency over what's happening. I know I remember being irritated by a answer given by the then chair of the Environment Agency, Emma Howard-Boyd, when she was asked to account for a drop in prosecutions. And she said it was because of expensive defence lawyers challenging the regulator through the courts. Can I just say something there? I would just like to say that when prosecutions are unsuccessful or they're dropped, the judge dismisses them, and they get nowhere, they don't get their costs back. So it's not, what we do is irrelevant because you don't actually get the cost back. And so, that's not the reason for a drop in prosecutions, because under the law doesn't permit recovery of the defence costs for companies. It's for me, one of the really unfair things. You can get a regulated operator prosecuted, found not guilty of everything, or the case gets dropped before it goes to court because the regulators just got things wrong, and so effectively acquitted of any allegations, but they cannot apply to recover their cost. There's no provision. That's it, unless it can be shown that the regulator has been acting in bad faith. So it's very, very, very limited, the measures to get costs back.
Just in terms of scale, how many similar people are in an industry to you in England and Wales? I know in Scotland there's very few specialist environmental lawyers. There's only probably a couple. Across the UK, is there lots of you?
Well, there are a handful of barristers who do environmental work in terms of acting on behalf of regulated industry, but they will also be doing other work as well, other criminal work as well. Mm-hmm. And so I'm unique insofar as I only do waste management.
You poor soul.
Oh, I don't know what that says about me, really. I'm conscious of the fact that there's always a competition between Anna Willits, Carla Bryan, who can get the best bin photos when on holiday.
You always need a decent bin photo.
I know. And we say, okay, this is when you need to get out more, when we're sending each other photos about bins. But I've been sucked into the sector, and I know in one of your earlier episodes you talked about the Waste Hotel California. I've certainly entered that, and I think I'm probably alone there. I think the rest of the bar has seen the sense that you can't just do waste management. You need to do something more.
From my experience,
decisions say it's great, and anyone thinking about doing it should, because all joking aside, I think it's fascinating. The law is really interesting. It's fast moving. You get to really get stuck into law, which I really enjoy doing. And yes, challenging the regulator, but that's what I'm paid to do. That's what my clients want me to do, is challenge the regulator. And there was the case. Well, I'm about to say last year, but actually probably end of 2023, when I went to the High Court on behalf of Suez to challenge the regulator about the lack of a fair and impartial route of appeal against compliance assessment reports. And that's a really good illustration, actually, of how that challenge has resulted in a wholesale change of the system to the benefit of all regulated industry. Those kind of cases are really interesting to work on. And so from a lawyer's perspective, it's fulfilling.
That's good. So what's the big, going into 2026, what's the big issues then? What's the big issues for your side? Is it, as the House of Lords says, they've all got to start working in partnership a bit better and a bit more coordinated and use the powers they've already got? Or is there something you think's missing from the whole setup?
I don't think there's anything missing. I think they just need to use the powers they've already got. I think there definitely needs to be a coordinated approach, and that's something that the House of Lords touched upon in terms of collaboration between, for example, local authorities and the Environment Agency, better collaboration. I think Kent do have, from the inquiry, from what my understanding is that they did have good collaboration. And even that didn't prevent Hodes Wood. So yes, better coordination. And you've got obviously a lot of regulatory changes coming down the track, and they've been talked about for so long, they're meant to be enforced by now. So whether 2026 is going to see them on the statute books, who knows? But obviously the big one being digital waste tracking. For my purposes, I don't think that's the panacea to all of this.
Never.
At Hose Wood, you're not going to have people leaving a digital footprint. They're not going to be going, oh, wait a second, let's just fill in our proper waste transfer notes to go and deposit this illegal waste. So that's not the solution, which is why better coordination, I think, between agencies is going to be important. So digital waste tracking, hopefully it will bring about positive changes.
I think the one positive change I think it will bring is actually making the producers think about it a bit more, because I think this is sometimes the thing that's a bit missing is it's always the waste industry's problem, but sometimes it's the actual producers that are driving the cost down so low, and it's them that's actually driving the illegal activity. If they have to track the waste, then they've got to have a part in that journey.
But I mean that comes back to, and it's something that CIWM have talked about for a long time, education. It comes back to education, and a few years ago, it was pre-COVID, CIWM used to run in conjunction with ESA a great campaign which was Right Waste, Right Place, and I was regularly on the road with the team going around doing lectures to people about right waste, right place. And it was great because it looked at waste classification, it looked at what you should be doing and best practice and what happens. And then I was dealing with what happens if everything goes wrong, what the consequences could be for the business. And we used to get a lot of really good feedback from that. But there's still, I think there's still a lot of ignorance about in relation to your duties for waste, whether that's the householder or whether that's construction industry or other industries. There's still a lot of ignorance.
Yeah, no, totally. Well, my view. My view is that the waste industry is very, very good at talking about the waste industry's problems to the waste industry, but we're very poor at talking about the issues to the big bad world out there.
Yeah. So I think that's something that, there does need to be some better educational backdrop, I guess, to waste and how it should be handled.
We can only do a little bit here in Rubbish Talk and try and share the knowledge.
Share the knowledge.
Share the knowledge. So I'm gonna give you a magic wand for one thing for the sector that you would like to use it for.
Accountability. That's what I want. Accountability. I'd like to see the regulator not marking its own homework. So I'd like to see an independence injected into the system. And you have that actually in Scotland, because you have SEPA, and then if it goes to prosecution,
it goes to the fiscal.
Yeah. And we don't have that in England. So you've got, judge, jury and executioner, basically. No accountability.
That was one of the things I was going to ask earlier on. So Environment Agency have got powers to take something directly to court.
Yeah.
Whereas in Scotland, SEPA, the Scottish Environment Protection Agency, have to put the case to the fiscal, and then the fiscal decide whether they're putting it to court.
Exactly.
Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. So there's a different system. And also, so there's accountability because the fiscal looks at it and says, has it met the test? Is it, is the evidence there, et cetera, whereas it doesn't happen in England. The Environment Agency basically is the regulator, the investigator, the prosecutor, and so there's a lack of accountability, and I find that very difficult. And if you have police officers who do things that are wrong, they're reported to the independent police commissioner. Sorry, it's the independent police. Until I'm actually, for a criminal practitioner, I should know these things. But the independent police commission, basically, it can get reported, and then it's investigated by an independent body. Whereas you make a complaint about an Environment Agency officer, it gets investigated by the Environment Agency, who then come back and say, you've done nothing wrong. And I find that very difficult, that there's lack of accountability.
But in Environment Agency Defence, that's probably how they've been set up. So it's probably not something they can change, is it? Is that for DEFRA, whoever manages the Environment Agency, to change?
Well, I mean, for example, challenging a car form. If you're challenging compliance assessment report, now as a result of the Suez case, it goes through the appeals process rather than the complaints process. And one of the things that we were pushing for during that process is to have it go to a panel which is independent. And so fine, have someone from the Environment Agency on there.
Yep.
But have somebody external who can do a checks and balances and, okay, the operator's complaining about this. Is it a valid complaint? So somebody who can step back. And it's for the health and safety executive, if you complain about a fee for intervention, so the health and safety executive comes to investigate something that's happened on your site, which is health and safety related, they can charge for that visit. And if you challenge the charges, it goes to a panel that has on it external independent people to do a checks and balances on that. Whereas that's resisted by the Environment Agency. And I think that's really disappointing, because I think it would give more confidence to the system if you had some kind of checks and balances, whether it's for complaints or whether it's for appeals against compliance assessment reports. So I guess as I've got the magic wand, I'm waving around. There's a broad competency. That's what I would like to have seen, is a panel that is, which has some independence on it, that it's not just. So in answer to your question, yes, it's how it's been set up, but it's not set in stone, and it could have changed, but it existed. So that would be my magic wand moment.
There we go. I like that. And then finally, there's probably some budding young lawyers listening to this. What advice would you give them? Keep going into the waste sector or run a mile?
I'd say go for it. I say absolutely go for it. I think it's, actually that's Vicky Hughes, the upcoming president. Her
is she vice? I think she's vice now.
Yes, she is, exactly. Vice, and I think her project is going to be on, why this is an attractive sector to go into. And I wholeheartedly endorse that. I think there's so many opportunities. It's fast moving. You can't get bored. Everything is, every day is different. And I think it's a really fun sector to be in.
Perfect. So that's good to the end of that, extensive question set that we just winged it really. But just finally, thank you ever so much for giving up your time. I think it's some of the things you were raising. I think it's fascinating. It's not an area I'm hugely knowledgeable about. No, some of the stuff, but I've certainly learnt a lot. So thank you.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed this episode. See you again next Thursday at 4 p.m. Don't forget to follow, share with friends, and send us your feedback at hello@rubbishtalk.co.uk.